Once a man respects himself, people treat him differently. That sounds like a reward system, doesn't it? Like life is a vending machine and self-respect is the coin you finally figured out how to use. But here's the paradox. The moment you respect yourself, you stop needing people to treat you differently at all. And that is when everything changes. I want you to imagine a man standing in the middle of a crowded room, wearing no armor, no performance, no resume stitched to his chest, no invisible begging bowl held out in front of him saying, "Please see me, please choose me, please don't leave." He's just standing there, relaxed, breathing, unapologetically present. And the strangest thing happens. People feel it before they understand it, before words, before logic. Because respect is not a behavior, it's a frequency. Most of us spend our lives broadcasting static. We say one thing with our mouths, another with our bodies, and a third thing with our fears. We smile while shrinking. We agree while resenting. We give while secretly hoping it will purchase love later, like some emotional layaway plan. And the world is a brilliant mirror. It doesn't hear what you say you deserve. It reflects what you believe you're worth. So when a man doesn't respect himself, he trains people how to treat him. Every time he laughs at a joke that hurts, every time he stays silent when his soul says no, every time he abandons himself to avoid being alone, he's teaching a class. And the curriculum is called, "This is how you can ignore me." But self-respect doesn't arrive with fireworks. It doesn't burst through the door shouting affirmations. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly. It begins the moment you stop negotiating with your own spirit. For me, it didn't look heroic. It looked like exhaustion. The kind of tired you feel when you realize you've been auditioning for your own life and still waiting for the call back. I had spent years being everything. Funny, elastic, loud, lovable. 1,000 faces, all smiling. And somewhere in there, the real one went missing. You see, the ego loves applause, but it hates stillness. Stillness feels like death to it, because in stillness, there's nothing to prove. And self-respect is deeply still. It doesn't argue, it doesn't chase, it doesn't over-explain. It simply stands. And when you stand, truly stand, something inside people gets very uncomfortable, because they can no longer lean on you, drain you, or define you. They can no longer use you as a place to hide from themselves. So, some will leave. Let them. Some will test you. Bless them. Some will suddenly treat you with a reverence that feels almost confusing. That's not because you became bigger. It's because you stopped being small on purpose. Here's the secret nobody tells you. People don't respect confidence. They respect congruence. When your thoughts, words, and actions stop arguing with each other, the room listens. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who didn't speak much, didn't posture, didn't sell, but somehow commanded the space? That's not dominance. That's alignment. That's a man who is no longer outsourcing his worth to the crowd. And here's where it gets tricky, because the ego will hijack this idea and turn self-respect into a costume. It'll say, I see. I'll just be tougher, colder, more untouchable. That's not self-respect. That's fear wearing a leather jacket. Self-respect isn't armor. It's honesty. It's the courage to feel fully without demanding that others fix the feeling for you. It's the moment you say, I will not betray myself today, even if it costs me approval. Especially if it costs you approval. Because approval is cheap, but self-abandonment is expensive. It costs you years. It costs you health. It costs you the quiet joy of waking up in your own body and feeling at home there. When a man respects himself, he stops explaining why his boundaries exist. He doesn't say, "I'm sorry, but..." He says, "No," and lets the silence do the talking. And oh, that silence is loud. It rearranges rooms. It reorganizes relationships. It exposes dynamics that were built entirely on your willingness to disappear. People who benefited from your lack of self-respect will call it selfish. That's okay. They were never speaking to you anyway. They were speaking to the role you played. And when the role ends, the story changes. Here's the beautiful part. The moment you stop demanding respect, you become respectable. Not because you've earned it, but because you're no longer asking permission to exist. You stop bending your spine into question marks. You become a period, complete, present, here. And something ancient recognizes something ancient. People don't bow to force. They bow to truth. And the truth is this: you were never meant to be tolerated. You were meant to be embodied. Self-respect is not loud. It's inevitable. It's gravity. And once you find it, you don't walk into rooms the same way again. You arrive. And the world, confused, curious, honest old mirror that it is, has no choice but to respond. Because finally, you are. You see, respect doesn't come from demanding better behavior from the world. It comes from withdrawing your participation in your own erasure. That's the part nobody prepares you for. Because when you stop erasing yourself, the world doesn't immediately applaud. Sometimes it stumbles. Sometimes it pushes back. Sometimes it asks, "Who do you think you are now?" And that question is a trap. Because the old you had an answer ready. The old you said, "I'm flexible. I'm easygoing. I don't need much." Those weren't virtues. They were survival strategies. They were the language of a nervous system trying to stay loved. Self-respect begins when you stop surviving your own life. When you realize you don't need to be digestible to be divine. And here's the thing. We confuse self-respect with self-importance all the time. Self-importance says, "I am above you." Self-respect says, "I am not beneath myself." Huge difference. One inflates the ego. The other dissolves it. Because the ego thrives on comparison. Better than, worse than, more than, less than. But self-respect lives outside the scoreboard. It doesn't need witnesses. It shows up in moments nobody sees. Like when you walk away from a conversation that feeds your insecurity instead of your truth. Like when you stop telling the same painful story just to feel known. Like when you feel the impulse to prove, and you let it pass through you like weather. That's respect, not a performance, a practice. And once you practice it long enough, people sense something different. They can't quite name it. They'll say things like, "You've changed," or "You seem grounded," or "You're hard to read lately." What they're really saying is, "I can no longer predict how to control you." Because predictability is the currency of manipulation. And a man who respects himself is no longer predictable in the ways that keep him small. He doesn't react on cue. He responds, or doesn't. He doesn't rush to fill silence with reassurance. He lets discomfort breathe. And discomfort is sacred. It's the doorway. Most people never walk through it. They decorate around it, distract from it, blame others for it. But when you sit inside discomfort without abandoning yourself, something alchemical happens. You discover that you are not fragile, you are spacious. And space commands respect. Think about it. A small, cluttered room feels frantic. A wide, open room feels calm, even if nothing is happening. Self-respect creates inner space. You're no longer crowded with other people's expectations, moods, projections. You stop mistaking proximity for intimacy. You stop mistaking attention for love. And love, real love, starts to feel quieter, less dramatic, less addictive. Because addiction is not affection. Addiction is a contract that says, "I'll abandon myself if you promise not to leave." Self-respect tears up that contract. Not angrily, gently. And that gentleness is what scares people, because they expect anger, they expect a fight. They expect you to justify, explain, or collapse. But instead, you remain kind, firm, unmoved. That's when people really feel it. Not when you assert dominance, but when you refuse to be destabilized. You don't flinch when someone misunderstands you. You don't chase clarity from people committed to confusion. You don't audition for peace. You inhabit it. And suddenly, conversations shift. Power dynamics dissolve. Relationships either deepen or evaporate. Both are wins. Because respect is not about being liked. It's about being real. And reality has a cleansing effect. It burns away arrangements that required you to be less than whole. Now let's talk about fear, because fear is always invited to this party. Fear says, if you respect yourself, you'll end up alone. That's the ego whispering bedtime stories. Here's the truth. You were already alone when you didn't respect yourself. You just had company. Noise, distraction, but not connection. Connection only happens when two people are actually there, not two performances shaking hands. And when a man respects himself, he becomes available for real connection for the first time. Not needy connection, not transactional connection, but grounded, mutual presence. Some people will rise to meet that, others won't. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And clarity is mercy. Self-respect also changes how time feels. You stop rushing, you stop chasing outcomes. You stop trying to arrive somewhere other than here. Because rushing is a form of disrespect. It says, this moment isn't enough. And when you respect yourself, you stop insulting the present. You treat your own attention like something sacred, not to be squandered on drama that leads nowhere, not to be donated to people who haven't learned how to hold it. That alone transforms how people treat you, because attention is power. And a man who respects himself spends it consciously. He doesn't give it away to earn crumbs. He invests it where it can grow. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world adjusts. It always does. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped lying, stopped shrinking, stopped asking, "Is this okay?" with every breath, and started living like your existence was already approved. Because it was. You just forgot. And the remembering? Oh, the remembering changes everything. Here's where the real shift happens. Not in how others see you, but in how you stop watching yourself. That's the quiet liberation nobody talks about. When a man respects himself, he stops narrating his own life from the outside, like a critic in the balcony taking notes on his worth. He stops asking, "How am I coming across?" every time he enters a room. Because the moment you're fully in the room, there is no balcony, there is no audience, there is only presence. And presence is disarming. People can't compete with it, they can't manipulate it, they can't rush it. Presence doesn't argue with reality, it inhabits it. That's why people treat you differently, not because you demanded better treatment, but because they're suddenly in the presence of someone who is not negotiating with existence. You see, disrespect thrives in ambiguity. When you're unclear about who you are, others will fill in the blanks for you. and they rarely use flattering ink. But when you are clear, not rigid, not defensive, just clear, the world recalibrates. Think of a tuning fork. Strike it, and everything nearby adjusts to its frequency. Self-respect is like that. It's not loud, but it's precise. It doesn't wobble. And the ego hates precision. The ego prefers fog. Fog is where it can pretend, perform, posture. But clarity? Clarity feels like exposure. So when you stop performing, people who relied on your performance feel naked, and they may project that discomfort onto you. Let them. Self-respect means you no longer take responsibility for other people's inner weather. You don't carry umbrellas for storms you didn't create. You let people feel what they feel. That alone is revolutionary. Most of us were trained to be emotional janitors, cleaning up messes that weren't ours, apologizing for tensions we didn't initiate, shrinking ourselves to maintain an illusion of harmony. But harmony built on self-erasure is just quiet chaos. And your nervous system knows it. That tightness in your chest, that lump in your throat, that fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, those are the receipts. Self-respect is listening to those signals without turning them into a courtroom drama. No prosecution, no defense, just listening. And then, this is the hard part, acting accordingly. Not dramatically, simply. You stop returning texts that leave you hollow. You stop overextending yourself for praise. You stop showing up where you're only tolerated. Not out of bitterness, out of reverence. Reverence for your own aliveness. And something miraculous happens when you do that. Your body relaxes. Your breath deepens. Time slows down. Because respect is rhythmic. It moves at the pace of truth, not fear. Fear is always in a hurry. Fear says, fix this now or you'll lose everything. Self-respect says, nothing real can be lost. And that sentence alone can rearrange a life. When you believe it, not intellectually, but somatically, you stop gripping. You stop clenching conversations. You stop gripping relationships. You stop gripping identities. And people feel that looseness as safety, or as threat, depending on how invested they were in your grip. But either way, it's honest. And honesty is the great purifier. Now, let's talk about love, because love is where this really gets tested. When a man doesn't respect himself, love becomes a performance review. He's constantly scanning for approval, reassurance, signs that he's doing it right. He confuses intensity with intimacy, drama with depth, attachment with devotion. But when self-respect enters the room, love becomes spacious, less hungry, less anxious. You don't need to merge to feel close. You don't need to disappear to be loved. You can stand in your own center and let love orbit naturally. And paradoxically, that's when love deepens. Because love doesn't want to be needed. It wants to be met. Two whole beings meeting is infinitely more powerful than two fragments clinging together for stability. And people respond to that wholeness instinctively. They trust you more. They listen more carefully. They don't feel the need to dominate or rescue you, because you're not asking them to complete you. You're inviting them to share space with you. And space, real space, is generous. This doesn't mean you become untouchable. Quite the opposite. You become more sensitive, more available. But you're no longer porous. You feel without leaking. You care without collapsing. You engage without entangling. That balance, that dance, is what people recognize as presence, maturity, depth. They might call it confidence, but that's just their word for someone who is no longer at war with themselves. And when the inner war ends, the outer battles lose their urgency. You don't need to win. You don't need to be right. You don't need to dominate narratives. You can let misunderstandings exist without rushing to erase them, because your worth is no longer up for debate. And here's the quietest truth of all. Once you respect yourself, you stop keeping score. You stop measuring effort, affection, recognition. You give because it feels true. You receive without guilt. You walk away without resentment. Because resentment is just grief that wasn't honored, and self-respect honors grief. It lets endings be endings. It lets people be who they are without demanding they become someone else for your comfort. It releases control. And control, oh, control is the last addiction to go. But when it does, life opens like a hand unclenching. And you realize you were never meant to be managed. You were meant to be lived. And when you live that way, open, grounded, unafraid of your own depth, the world can't help but notice. Not because you're impressive, but because you're free. And freedom is unmistakable. And freedom, once tasted, changes the flavor of everything. You can't unknow it. You can't pretend you didn't feel that internal click the moment something stopped chasing and started resting. That's when life stops feeling like a test you're constantly failing. That's when you realize you were never on trial. You were just asleep. Once a man respects himself, he doesn't walk faster to prove purpose. He walks slower. He lets moments catch up to him. He stops trying to outrun his own shadow and finally turns around to see it bowing quietly behind him. Because the shadow only chases when you run. Self-respect is the moment you stop running. And that stillness, oh, that stillness terrifies the world at first. Because the world is addicted to motion, to urgency, to noise. But stillness reveals what's real. It reveals which relationships were built on mutual presence and which were built on your willingness to bend. It reveals which ambitions were inspired and which were compensations. It reveals which versions of you were costumes stitched together by fear and which one has been breathing patiently underneath it all. That one, the quiet one, that's who people finally meet. Not the performer, not the pleaser, not the fighter, but the being. And beings don't compete. They resonate. You stop correcting people's perceptions of you. You stop curating understanding. You let yourself be misunderstood without collapsing into explanation. Because explanation is often just fear wearing logic. You don't need everyone to get you. You need to get yourself. That's respect. And something magical happens when you do. You stop leaking energy into the past, rehashing conversations, editing memories, wishing you had said something smarter, braver, sharper. You stop borrowing anxiety from the future, imagining outcomes that haven't arrived and may never exist. You arrive here, fully. And people feel that arrival like a deep exhale. They trust you more because you trust the moment. They listen because you're not trying to convince. They respect you because you're not asking them to hold you up. You're standing, but not rigid, relaxed, open, rooted. That rootedness is ancient. It reminds people of something they forgot, something before performance, before survival strategies, before the long, exhausting masquerade. And some people, without knowing why, will soften around you. They'll speak more honestly. They'll behave more carefully. They'll meet you with a presence they didn't know they had. Not because you demanded respect, but because respect emerged naturally in the space you created. Others, though, others will drift away, quietly, sometimes dramatically, sometimes accusing you of changing, withdrawing, becoming distant. You didn't become distant. You became centered. And not everyone benefits from you having a center. That's okay. You're not here to be useful. You're here to be true. Self-respect doesn't isolate you. It clarifies your orbit. It reveals who can meet you without requiring you to leave yourself behind. And those connections, fewer, deeper, calmer, are worth more than 1,000 shallow affirmations. Now, let's speak plainly. Self-respect is not a destination. It's not a finish line you cross and suddenly life becomes gentle. It's a daily alignment, a quiet choice. Sometimes you'll forget. Sometimes you'll slip into old patterns, old bargains, old performances. That's not failure. That's being human. Self-respect doesn't punish relapse. It notices. It returns. It says, "Ah, there you are," and gently invites you back into your body, back into your breath, back into now. That return, that willingness to come home again and again without shame, is the deepest form of respect there is. Because shame says, "I am broken." Respect says, "I am learning." And learning is alive. The world responds to aliveness, not polish, not perfection. Aliveness. That spark in someone who is no longer pretending to be finished, who isn't hiding their edges or their softness, who lets paradox live inside them without trying to resolve it. Strong and gentle, firm and kind, clear and compassionate. That's not a contradiction. That's wholeness. And wholeness doesn't need validation. It radiates. So when people treat you differently after you respect yourself, don't mistake it for a reward. It's not the world applauding you. It's the world adjusting to reality. To you, finally standing where you've always been. Unsplit, unapologetic, present. And the greatest irony? The moment you stop needing respect is the moment it surrounds you. Like gravity, like silence, like truth. So take a breath, drop your shoulders, unclench your jaw. You don't need to earn your place here. You already belong. Respect that, and let the world catch up.